Okay. I am with I've hit record and I'm with Holly Lyne. Holly, hello.
Hi.
So Holly, tell us about where you are in your author journey.
So it's actually my 10th anniversary of publishing this year.
No way.
Yeah,
That's exciting.
it is.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm the stereotype I've been writing ever since I was a little kid, and I drifted away, did other things in life. And then it was when I had my first child, and I was sort of in that stage. I wasn't working and I
Mm,
was mothering, and I wanted something else for me. And so I came back to writing, and
nice.
yeah, and I discovered self-publishing. It was a new thing at the time, like 2012, 2013.
Yeah,
And yeah, and I hit publish on my first book right at the end of 2013. And
nice.
I've learned a lot since then.
Well, a lot's changed since then too.
Oh, it has,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So how many books do you have in the world now?
10.
Nice. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Favorite one?
Oh, no, no, I can't. That's like choosing a favorite child.
Oh, I can
Oh,
totally pick.
I can
I know
totally
exactly which one's
that.
my favorite.
um, okay, now my favorite book is probably Rise of the Furies.
Okay. Nice. Why is that a favorite?
It's the last book in my first series. So
Okay.
it was wrapping up this incredibly personal story. Um, and it was both really hard to write and really easy to write because
Nice.
it flowed amazingly well, but it was terrifying because it was the end.
Okay.
And then there was this, what am I going to do next?
Nice.
Feeling about it. So
Yeah, that's
there's a
great.
lot of emotion in that book.
Yeah, that's fun. I've actually never finished a series, so I don't
Oh,
know what that's like.
oh.
I keep stopping my series one book before they're done, and then I never write the final book.
Oh, no.
This isn't my therapy session though, so I'll hold that for when I talk to my therapist this week. Um, okay, you're also a podcaster,
I am.
and you have a at the time of this starting, it's not super new, it's a couple months old, right?
Mm.
But what's the podcast
So
you're
it's
doing?
Write a Roadmap, and I think we're 17 episodes in now.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a weekly podcast, it comes out on Wednesdays, and the episodes are really short. I try and keep them to around 5 minutes.
nice.
So it's just like a little weekly dose of inspiration and motivation
Yeah, it's
to,
shot in the arm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I love that. Okay, you sent me chapter 3 of Demon Shroud.
Hmm.
I'm gonna share my screen. We can look at it together. Dun, dun, dun. Maybe I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, there we go. That's more helpful. Um, so first off, getting pieces like this for me is tough because it's really, really good and I don't have a lot to say. Um, so I'm gonna get real nitpicky on you.
Okay,
When you
that's good.
send
I
me
like
good
that.
things, again, there's this weird thing, and I know you know this, that if you a piece could be absolutely perfect, but if you send it to an editor and say edit this, they will give you notes. Like
Yeah.
because you're telling them find notes. So yeah. Um I had one big question before we get into it. So the structure of the piece is when Talker, your main character, is entering this town at the for the first time, and he goes to this bar where magic people like him are welcome,
Hmm.
and he has a conversation with this kind of gangster, backroom dealing dude.
Hmm.
How do you want Wind Talker to come off in this conversation?
Oh,
Right now he's very vulnerable.
yeah. Yeah, I want that, and I want him to be extremely uncomfortable with that vulnerability because he's not used to it.
You want
He's
him to recognize that he's being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
because he's normally very arrogant and um kind of dominant, you
Okay.
know, and he's in this new situation and he's out of his depth and he needs to know it.
Okay. So he needs to feel out of his depth.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to add some of that in when we get down to his conversation with the big boss man. Because right now he comes off as just naive almost.
Mm.
Because the uncomfortability isn't, I wasn't feeling it.
Okay.
It may have just been that I missed it. It might be, we might get down there and read those lines and be like, oh, there it is right there. You said he's uncomfortable. But it's that I expected this conversation to be much more guarded than it is.
Okay.
He's just giving personal information to this complete stranger. Well, I'm
Hmm.
staying at this place with this lady. And it's like, wait, is that supposed to be happening? So we'll get I wanted to ask that up front just as we get into his experience all the way through the piece, kind of shaping that emotional flow
Hmm.
to that conversation.
Okay.
Okay. You start with this really beautiful opening where he's kind of experiencing the city for the first time. There's a couple things I want you to do with it. First, I want you, it needs to be rearranged. Um,
Okay.
not and literally just like taking some of the words down here and putting them up here. Because the words are great. But it's a as you're crafting this experience for me, the reader, I need the experience to have a logical flow to it.
Hmm.
Right? Like it needs to go big to small, or it needs to go impersonal to personal, or it needs to go experiential as you're going through the senses each time, so that I, as the participant in it, can live through what's going on. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
Um, so here is where it starts to go off. And I'll get to the other notes too, but I'm going big to small first.
Okay.
So that we know what's going on. So you give me a late in the evening down the hall. Heat still clung to the air. The streets were alive. Uh, with late night shoppers and hoppers. So you've got this great opening couple sentences here about the kind of busyness of what's going on.
Hmm.
And then you move into his experience of that busyness. So you describe to me the what he's seeing and hearing. And then you say he soaked up the ambience and indulged in one of his favorite pastimes, people watching. And then you get more granular. So you're going big. Let's look at like the whole street is bustling, and now you're coming into smaller places, right?
Hmm.
And you're like, men in the fancy suits laughed raucously. Women in short skirts rebuffed their advances with their friends. Energy spit the nightline establishments into the streets, which throbbed with black cabs and slow moving traffic. Great line. I really love that line. Maybe the heat was maybe it was the heat, or sorry, maybe the heat was making people crazy, or maybe it was always like this. So this was the first line where I I started to kind of question his emotional experience, because everything in this opening so far has been positive.
Hmm.
The hustling and bustling, you know, men are laughing at raucously, women are pushing the raucous men away. It feels like a big city party, but then you describe it as crazy,
Okay.
which has a little bit of a negative connotation to it.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How do you want him feeling about all of this happening?
He's sort of detached from it because he's not human.
Yeah.
He can't relate to it, but he finds it interesting.
Is he enjoying it, or is it confusing?
Um, it probably makes him nervous
Okay.
because people can be unpredictable when they are energized.
Okay. So we need more fear here then, because I'm not getting fear at all, from him.
Okay.
I'm getting, and it's the great way you're part of good writing is that it gets us into problems. Um, Things here, like it was one of the most affluent areas he'd ever seen, right?
Hmm.
There's no nervousness and there's a sense of awe in that.
Yeah.
He soaked up the ambience and indulged in one of his favorite pastimes, people watching. You're giving me a sense of like wide-eyed kid from Kansas coming off the subway at New York Times and opening and is like, wow, as all the lights glitter and beam.
Mm.
But there's not any nervousness in here yet.
Okay.
Um, I liked it how it is, but it is a different emotional experience than what you
Mm.
just described you're looking for.
Well, maybe I'm wrong because I haven't consciously thought about that. So, and maybe, yeah,
And I
because
can,
he is that sort of wide-eyed. He's like, wow, this is different, you know?
yeah, we're early in the, what's his growth arc through the book? How does he change?
Um, he's very guarded and self-sufficient and doesn't trust anyone to begin with,
Okay.
and he needs to learn to open himself up a bit and trust some people.
Okay. How far off are we from the inciting incident?
Um, it's I mean, it's kind of already happened.
Okay. So we're post inciting incident.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, well, no, I suppose the main inciting incident, the proper kicking off, is still like 2 chapters away.
Okay. So then we're in world before. We're in his
Yeah.
like, let's get to know him before
Yeah.
he has to start making choices. So he needs to be more locked down.
Hmm.
We need to show him more nervous and afraid of all of these untrusting and guarded here.
Okay.
He needs to be less wide-eyed Kansas and more a scared dog who ran out into the middle of the street.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? So,
Yeah.
you know, he still clung to the heavy air of the streets were alive with late night shoppers and hoppers. That's a great opening line, but the Wind Talker wanted to get a better lay of the land, so he stayed above ground and made his way slowly to Walton and Kensington Street. We need here to have an expression of how he feels about
Hmm.
that, overwhelmed by the sights and the sounds and the lights in the air.
Yeah.
Uh,
Part
he wanted nothing but to run back down, but he knew that he had to understand.
yeah.
Yeah.
Part of what's going on, and which comes out in the preceding chapters, is he really hates getting the tube,
Okay.
because he hates being contained in
Hmm.
a metal tube
Yeah, yeah,
underground. It's
yeah.
incredibly dangerous for a shapeshifter. Um, so so I should maybe call back to that.
Yeah,
And
I totally that's a great contrast of
yeah.
how but between the tube and between being confined in a metal tube underground and having to tolerate the um craziness, like this is where the word crazy would come in.
Mm,
Having to tolerate the craziness of the streets, he'd take the streets any day. Does that make sense? Like
yeah.
at least here he was free to move. That kind of reflection from him helps me not just set this description. Like right now you're doing a great job of having me live the description,
Hmm.
but not I'm not living it yet through Wind Talker's eyes.
Gotcha.
I'm just living a busy street. So part of the problem is you're depending on me to have a similar experience as Wind Talker does, but I
Mm,
love busy streets. I am the wide-eyed kid from Kansas. I come up from the New York Times subway. I'm like, we're here. So like it's that like, I read this in absence of Wind Talker's reflection. I just assume my own.
mm,
And my own is very different than what you're
yeah.
describing. I'm not nervous in large cities. I'm like, look at all these people. Like, so it's that, we have to gauge that you have to give me his
Mm,
experience so that I'm living this through his eyes
yeah.
as opposed to assuming my own.
Sure.
Um Now here again, I'm gonna have you change this imagery. This is, I told you in a note over here, I want more reflection up here. This is
Mhm.
the kind of reflection I want. He took his time soaking everything in. It was still hot and muggy. Crawling sticks in the back of his neck. It was, now that's a nice, like, crawling heat that sticks to the back of his neck. Great line. Um, I needed though to compare to what he's experiencing, not just the heat,
Mm.
but the chaos of of a busy city street. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah.
Um, it reminds me actually of the time that, it would be, it's interesting as you reimagine this opening, how he's going to respond. Do you show him in the previous chapter emerging from the tube?
Yeah.
Okay. That's probably where you can really set some of this up. I remember when I took my kids to New York for the first time, we stepped into Times Square and two of my kids were really pumped. They were like really excited. I didn't know it right away, but my fourth child was having a bit of a panic attack
Oh.
because there's so many lights and there was
Mm.
so much going on. And there's a guy dressed like Spider-Man who ran up to him, and he was not prepared
Mhm.
for a someone who is much shorter and heavier than Spider-Man was supposed to be in a Spider-Man costume, approaching him with a camera, asking him if he wanted to take a picture. So it was that kind, he just froze. And then he started to cry, which was
Aw.
sad. And I felt like a bad father. But um, that being said, we need that kind of thing here.
Mm.
Now, here's where, to go back to what we were originally talking about, here's where you start to get out of linear order.
Mhm.
It was dark. The bright lights in the street lamps, bars and restaurants filled the sky night haze. Cars trundled, chugging smoke. The noise was intense. So now we're back to the big.
Mm.
Do you see what I mean? We went
Yeah.
big. Here's the environment. You didn't give me necessarily how he should feel about it, which we need. You're then like, okay, here's the individual stuff he's seen, men and women running around doing this thing. Then you're like, here's how the heat is making him feel. We're back to big again.
Mm.
So it's got that weird right now kind of A, B, C, A.
Mm.
Um, but you don't go on with B and C again. We don't get into like a granular and then his personal experience. So it feels, this ends up feeling out of sync, and it feels like, oh, I guess we're coming back again.
Mm.
This is one of those things that like readers can't name, but they feel.
Mm.
And it starts to feel, it'll make your descriptions feel aimless. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we're just describing random things. Like, that's how it feels, because there's not a strategic linearity to how you're taking me into the scene. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel? That's a lot on this opening page. How do you feel about it? I
No,
told you I was
it's
going to get picky. I
yeah.
warned you.
You did. It's great. And yeah, absolutely right. I completely agree. And I hadn't seen it that way. So yeah.
Again, I love your descriptions. I think they're fantastic. Like, I would really just push the order of things around. I wouldn't
Hmm.
lose any. And then give me a little bit of his responses to it. Like, here's another one that's a little out of sync. Sirens wailed in distant streets and people dumped into Windtalker as they passed. Now, if he's nervous, that should be freaking him out.
Yeah.
He loved it though. It was raw humanity alive and kicking. So this is where I'm getting the like wide-eyed Kansas kid. Like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh. It was the beating heart of the city. It was the reason that he was what he was. Um, so there is that, like, if you want him nervous, he needs to have more of a, I got to get out of here.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, Holly, I like this wide-eyed Kansas kid description. I realizing I keep using Kansas kid, and you're not from the States. Does that illustration mean anything to you?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. I
absolutely.
just wanted to make sure. Just wanted to make sure you weren't just being polite.
No,
And
no.
later you're like, well, I guess I have to Google Kansas now. Um,
I'm
why?
familiar with the Wizard of Oz, Jeff.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Why? Yeah, wide-eyed, country bumpkin kid.
Yeah.
That's probably not better. Oh, the Americanisms this morning. Uh, in my defense, I drank a lot last night. So sorry, nobody wants to know that. Um, yeah, so this is you have this comparison here. We get into world building now, which is a nice venture, by the way, to go like because the first two big paragraphs establish the scene, and now you're talking to me about how the scene relates to his world.
Yeah.
And again, there's going to be you're going to have to work this disconnect because he feels positive about how the human world and his world interact. Does
Hmm.
that make sense? And
Yeah.
your big conclusion for him here is so he smiled and breathed deeply, allowing his arms to brush against other people, feeling the hot pavement beneath the soles of his shoes. If you want him to stay nervous and rushing into the bar, because from here we move into the bar,
Hmm.
you've got to change his response to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, any reflections before we move into the bar? Anything else you want to talk about with this scene? Any questions you have with it?
No, I don't think so. You're
Okay.
giving me lots to think about.
Well, and again, I would focus on his growth arc because
Yeah.
that's where I was going before I got lost in Kansas. I would focus on his growth arc. If he's moving from guarded and closed off to being more trusted and open, he can't be open here.
Mm,
He's got to be closed to what's going on. You have to show us his like I'm guarded, I'm closed, I'm in this place just surviving. This would feel more like him at the end of the book
mm,
of like I'm understanding how to take it all in. And it might actually be if you nail this scene really well, it might actually be a great repeated scene at the end of the book where
mm,
he is actually able to stand in the city and take everything in. Does
mm.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. This would be a good opening though for somebody who's naive and
Mm,
is learning that they need to become more guarded in the big city.
yeah.
This would be a great opening for that. Did you ever see the TV show 30 Rock?
No.
It's a comedy that ran with Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin. There's a
Yeah.
character in there who's like a page, who's like a kind of, I don't know, assistant. And he's played by this actor who's known for being this kind of like wide-eyed country kid. This is
Hmm.
a great opening for him. His growth arc is always you have to trust people less and learn to be more closed off. And
Mm.
that's this is a fan this would be his opening is walking in and standing in the street and being like I love New York, right? Like it's that kind of yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
um so here's another one where you do a great job describing the place, but you leave it open for me to decide how I feel about it, not telling me how Wind Talker and I feel about it.
Hmm.
It took a considerable amount of time to get there, but eventually he arrived at the Eclipse. It was a beautiful cocktail bar, standing in the corner of two broad streets. Now remember, I am an introvert who loves people and loves new things and fun things. So when you use the phrase, it was a beautiful cocktail bar standing in the corner of two broad streets, I'm like, ooh, this is so fun. It had a glass frontage and a little tables packed together on the pavement outside, a neat black silver rope making it from the rest, marking it out from the rest of the pavement. I'm like, oh, and it's exclusive. Inside was bright lit pendulous bulbs. Inside the chrome surrounds, a vast mirror lined the wall of the bar, reflecting all of the light that came back into the crowded space. And I'm like, uh, just give me a laptop and a cocktail, and I will sit here for the next 4 days. The people inside and the tables in the streets were all well dressed, designer clothes, wore expensive watches. And I'm like, now I'm with fancy people. The music throbbed, out the oven doors and some of the upbeat contemporary disco track. Now, a ripple down Windtalker's spine signaled the hidden matter's release of his cloak over the shifter. So beautiful description. I feel like I am living in this bar, and
Mm.
Jeff Elkins, am super excited to be there. This is like my favorite night. I'm like, Dad, this is going to be great. We're going to have a really good time. As an introvert, I'm going to go stand in the corner and watch everybody else, but I'm going to have a fantastic time doing it. That is not how you want Windtalker to feel, right?
No.
That's also not how you want me, the reader, to feel. You want me
Hmm.
feeling what Windtalker's feeling. So we need some hints in here into how he feels about it. So how
Mm.
does he feel walking into this gorgeously designed bar?
Really uncomfortable. It's not his sort of place at all.
Why not?
Um, I mean, he doesn't like being in close quarters with lots of humans, for one thing.
Okay.
Um, but also, like, he's not a fancy, well-dressed kind of guy. And like, there's a bit coming up about his like sweaty shirt, and
Yeah.
like, um, if he has to socialize in some sort of public drinking venue, it would be like a really old man's pub with like cask ales and
Nice.
like exposed beams and stuff, and only three people in there. That would be his ideal.
Okay. Is that how this is a weird question, but is that how you feel about these kind of places?
No, I like them.
Okay. I was curious as to where this is coming from because it's written like somebody who would love this kind of place.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think we need there's two ways you could go with it. You could make the description of it more in his perspective, or the other way to go is to give me keep the description how it is and give me his perspective.
Mm.
It really depends on your narrator voice through the piece.
Hmm.
If are we head hopping at all, or are we in Windtalker's head the whole book?
It's just Windtalker. Yeah.
Okay. How detached right now, I would say your narrator voice is detached from Windtalker, and that you're
Mm.
telling me how Windtalker sees things, but you're not in Windtalker's eyes. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah.
Which I actually prefer. I prefer a narrator voice that is almost commenting on what's happening, but this is
Hmm.
my personal preference. Um, so if that's the case and you want to keep that narrator voice, you can keep these descriptions how they are, right? It took a considerable time, but he arrived at the Eclipse. It was a beautiful cocktail bar standing on the corner of two broad streets. Not that Windtalker appreciated that in any way. All he saw was the chaos of the people coming in and out. It had a glass frontage, little tables packed together, the pavement outside, a neat black silver rope marking it out from the rest of the pavement. Uh, Windtalker sighed as he weaved his way through the people to come into the front door, right? Like not wanting
Mm.
to be touched, people continually brushing up against him. Once again, he longed for the, expanses of X place that he was before he was here. Right
Hmm.
inside was brightly lit by pendulous bulbs. Inside chrome surrounds, a vast mirror along the wall, reflecting all the light back into the crowded space. Windtalker felt like he could be seen from all angles.
Mm.
He wanted nothing more than to disappear into a corner. Can you see how like I'm taking the same descriptions and I'm like shaping them for the reader to be like, hey, this is how we feel about this.
Mm.
We're not okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Um, and again, the only reason I'm making it that kind of closed off and untrusted is because we're at the beginning of the book and we you really want to hammer home like this guy is guarded and untrusting and doesn't like being here. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah.
Um, sorry, I'm trying to figure out when the heck I was talking about. In his experience, it's in my note there. And like, that's a long note, and I don't think it says anything. In his experience, trouble tended to find shifters where they lived. A pair of young women in extremely short skirts and skimpy flip-flops filed out the door as Windtalker passed through it, their bodies coming close to his, their eyes raking him up and down, taking in his scruffy shorts and sweat-stained shirt. So here's the sweat-stained shirt, but I don't know that that's because of nervousness.
Because the heat,
I think it's because of the
mainly.
heat. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think he's like, Idris Elba walking into a disco club here. Like, I don't know that it's like that he's nervous
Sure.
because of that. Um, there were humans both flinching from under his sorrow gaze. So like again, here is that like we need we need this to feel more uncomfortable for him.
Hmm.
Are we setting up anything for him here? Is he gonna like struggle? So again, I haven't read the first two chapters, so I'm in a little bit of a disadvantage.
Sure.
This feels like a vampire moment where this is a classic vampire trope scene where two unsuspecting people kind of quasi check out the vampire and he's holding himself back from eating them. Is that where this is going in his
No.
story? Okay. Okay. That was just me though. I was just curious about where this is headed. Um, yeah, so again, I would just use this like so these women aren't coming back. This isn't like any kind of he's not gonna
No.
leave the bar, find them and eat them.
No, it was
Okay.
just me trying to show his discomfort at the close proximity.
Okay. Again, it's the descriptions are too happy.
Okay.
We need to pull them back. Uh
Right.
yeah. And I do think, Holly, I'm going to say this again. Your use of language is so crisp and so well communicating that in these opening two pages, as you're telling me, I'm experiencing it, and absent his reflections on it, you've helped me experience it, but I'm applying my own feelings
Mm,
toward it.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we meet a guy at the bar. This conversation at the bar is great, right? He tells him to come back. They immediately know that they're shifters. He tells him to come back to the back, and he comes in to see the boss. Um, this is another place where I'm not sure how to feel about the boss.
Hmm.
So, someone new to see you, boss, the bartender said. He quickly left the room, closing the door behind him. The man set forward, placing his elbows on his knees. He gestured to the sofa to his left, and Windtalker sat down without speaking. What can I do for you? The man asked, filled with a voice filled with gravitas. Windtalker blinked in surprise. It wasn't the sort of welcome that he was accustomed to. So I don't know how he feels about this guy in this back room, or even being taken to this back room.
Mm.
And so when he says he blinked in surprise, it wasn't the sort of welcome he was accustomed to. I'm like, oh, okay, so we're in a good place. This is fun. We're having a good time, right? Like, so again, we need to like give us some of that.
Mm.
Um, like we have a very positive tent here
Hmm.
to what's going on. How do you want him feeling? You said you want him uncomfortable. How do you want him feeling when he encounters the boss? Is there relief here, or is this should he be becoming more guarded?
Um, I guess, I mean, he doesn't know what to expect when he goes into this situation. He's been sent here to get help. So I mean, he's expecting to get that help, but he's never met this guy. Um, he doesn't know what it's, how they're going to interact. So
Gotcha.
there's some caution. Um, and then hence the surprise because within the context of the series and the world that I've established, shifters are very territorial,
Gotcha.
and so this is usually was met with, what do you want, or get off my territory. That's what he's used to. So this is throwing him a little bit, like, what, these people are just welcoming me, this is so weird.
Gotcha. So a lot of times I fall into this trap. This is a common thing I do in my writing too. I don't tell you how the characters feel, so you don't know how to feel.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to avoid the like show me, don't tell me
Mm-hmm.
trope. Um, show me, don't tell me, 9 times out of 10 is referring to an author summarizing things
Hmm.
and keeping me out of the scene. So if you were showing me in this, it would be like, you know, he had a great conversation with a guy in the back room, and the guy in the back room, they traded a pendant, and the guy in the back room told him where he could find his next establishment, and he left and went there. Right?
Hmm.
That's telling me you're like summarizing this whole conversation that's about to happen. And that's when people are like, hey, show me, don't tell me, show me, don't tell me. In this part, you are showing me I am deep into the scene, right? Like I am
Hmm.
experiencing it in deep ways. And what's missing though is the character's engagement with it,
Hmm.
which is that is not that phrase, show me, don't tell me. So I don't know if that fear is lurking in your head as you're writing, but you're not doing that. You've got me deeply engaged in the scene.
Hmm.
There's just I need to know how, for Wind Talker to be my vehicle that I'm traveling on this emotional journey with, I need to know how he and I feel about this.
Hmm.
So I need those moments of reflection here, like you just said to me, where he's confused
Hmm.
around, because you tell me, like, hey, here's, like, you give me his, like, oh, I'm surprised. But because I didn't know he was uncomfortable coming into the room, because I didn't have any reflection on how he felt about the boss, I'm just adding positive to positive. So we got
Hmm.
to dig into that
Sure.
feeling of uncomfortable. Um, Now, here is where he goes, what I would say, this sentence, he goes full country bumpkin, like excited country bumpkin. Hi,
Yeah.
Windtalker said, suddenly feeling rather small, young, and green. I just got to the city and I need to get myself oriented. I need cash for clothes, supplies for rituals, and that sort of thing. Right? Like he's needs are vulnerable, right? Like if we're
Hmm.
uncomfortable and we're guarded, we don't want to show that we have weaknesses.
Hmm.
So first, hi is a very like friendly word. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Two people like jockeying between each other who are positioning for, I don't know you, you don't know me, I'm uncomfortable, we're having this power dynamic struggle. They don't start with hi.
Hmm.
They usually go straight into like, when my name's Windtalker, or uh thanks for seeing me, I'm new here.
Hmm.
But that's the guarded response. Like that's all he's gonna say. Thanks
Yeah.
for seeing me, I'm new here. And then you might have the big man be like, yeah, most of those who get straight off the train like you are looking for cash, clothes, and supplies. Have you found a supplier yet?
Hmm.
And then you can have Windtalker be like, no, not yet.
Hmm.
Can you feel the difference in the like
Yeah. Yeah.
positioning? So again, I like this character, but I don't think it's who you're intending to write.
Mm.
And it's a little, and part of the reason I'm pushing on this so hard, Holly, is because the country bumpkin character is out of genre.
Mm.
That is not an urban fantasy character. Does
No.
that make sense?
Hmm.
Which could be really fun, but I don't know that like that's, I would actually love to see the country bumpkin in a urban fantasy now that we're talking about it, but I don't think that's what you're going for here.
No.
So I want you to work his utterances and his voice. Talk to me a little bit about his voice. How is he in your other books?
Yeah. This is this is like a spin-off series,
Hmm.
and in the first series he was um a major character but not a point of view character,
Okay.
and he was at times an antagonistic force.
Okay.
um he rubbed my protagonists, my main point of view characters, the wrong way on a number of occasions. And so yeah, I'm having to shift my perspective on how I see him, because
Yeah.
now I want him to be you know, a sympathetic character. So I feel a little out of my depth. I
Yeah.
guess I feel a bit like he does actually, so I should channel that,
Super funny. Unless channeling it makes you positive like me, and then no, you shouldn't.
right?
Then you should fight it. How did he rub them the wrong way?
um, he's arrogant and quite he just knows what he wants and will pretty much do whatever it takes to get the job done, even if people end up getting hurt.
Okay. So arrogant and a little self-absorbed.
Mm,
Okay. Um, what's he doing if he's at a party? What's he doing at a party?
wouldn't go to a party.
Wouldn't go to a party. Um, so he's standing outside looking at everybody being like, those idiots in there at that party.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, does he have any friends?
Um, no, he would like, I mean, his pack are like family.
Okay.
Um, and he has contacts and acquaintances, but I'm not sure he would consider any of them friends.
In the previous book, is he ever vulnerable with anybody?
Um, a little near the end of the series when he grows and he learns. Um, but because he's not a point of view character, we don't get into his head.
Okay. Does he pick up a sidekick in this book at all?
He will do, yeah. He's gonna develop a little group that become like his new pack, his new
How
family.
far away are we from starting to meet them?
We've met a couple of them already.
Great. Okay.
And then, well, hang on. Obviously, I've written past this point, so I'm just thinking, actually, what's happened at this point in the story? Uh, yeah, I think we've met one of them already. We certainly meet the rest of them very soon after this. And in fact, I mean, this character that he's speaking with is one of them.
For your other protagonists, how much inner thought do you give them?
Quite a lot.
Okay. I Here's going to be my recommendation because we're about to get into this conversation, and the character voice you have here is not the character voice you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to fix the character voice.
Yeah.
We need to up his arrogance, and we need to up his self-absorption
Mm-hmm.
through this whole piece. And you're right, it's going to make him very dislikable.
Yeah.
So but you're growing a character from dislikable to likable,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're growing the isolated. We always want to write these isolated lone wolves, not understanding that people don't tend to like isolated lone wolves. They're not lovable characters. So, um, we want it, but you're taking this isolated lone wolf and you're making him a community leader. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
that growth arc you're describing.
Yeah.
So that self-absorption is going to change to he's always probably going to stay a little arrogant, but that self-absorption is going to change to compassion for others. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like that growth arc you have through here. This voice that you have right here needs to be the voice of his sidekicks. The way you make a character like him, who's very unlikable, palatable, is you give them sidekicks who are energetic and optimistic and positive, because if the sidekick likes him, we'll like him too.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's the classic Indiana Jones problem.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana Jones is a highly unlikable character.
Yeah.
He is grumpy. He is a little mean. He's very arrogant. He knows all of the answers all of the time, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just a jerk. So in the first movie, you give him an adventurous, outgoing, um, very enchanting female companion.
Mm-hmm.
If she's willing to follow him around the story, we're willing to follow him around the story. In the second movie, you give him a small Asian child
Mm.
who is very excited. right?
Yeah.
To chase him around. And that's great. In the third movie, he has a whole cadre of people, including his father,
Mm,
who his father is very likable, right? Like,
yeah.
so we're willing to hang with Indy because Sean Connery's there being as charming as he can possibly be.
Yeah.
So, but that's what you're gonna have to do with Windtalker, because to
Mm,
make this character work in pieces like this where he's alone, we need 5 times more inner thought
hmm
than you're giving me right now. That's now that we're talking more, that's what's missing from this entire first 2 pages. I
mm,
have no idea what's happening in his head.
mm,
And I need him in conversation with this world. I
yeah.
need you to give me this brilliant description you've written. And then right here, I need inner thought
hmm
about what he's thinking. I need you to give me this brilliant description where you get closer into the people and show me the energy happening. And then I need inner thought
hmm
as to how he's thinking about it and how he's feeling about it. The problem is, being arrogant and self-absorbed, his feelings and thoughts aren't going to match the reader's feelings and thoughts because you're writing an asshole. So he's not going to like it. But if you can put people with him who are naturally drawn to him and like him, we will tolerate him
mm,
as he changes and grows into a character we actually like. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
So when we get into this conversation, this first big conversation in the chapter with the mob boss, um, I need him, I need wind talkers, I need twice, 3, 4 times the inner thought and much less vocalization.
hmm
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When you're writing inner thought, is it third person where you're telling me how they think, or is it first person where they're actually where we're seeing their thoughts?
Well, I write in third person.
Yeah, but there's like a sorry, first person is not the right description. There's
Like close third
like
person.
close third where it's like hi wind talker said suddenly feeling rather small and green. God, I hate feeling this way, he thought to himself. Or
hmm
is it more descriptive inner thought of like feeling smaller and green? He couldn't help thinking about how much he hated being made to feel less than the people around him.
Yeah, like that descriptive.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to need a lot of those sentences throughout this piece,
hmm
showing us, and he needs to have a lot of disdain.
hmm
So when you're talking about his voice, the topics, we break voice down into topics. He talks about the words he uses, the body language he has, the cadence, like the construction of his utterances, how his words look on the page when he talks, and how he participates in a conversation.
hmm
The arrogant side of him, he's going to participate in a lot of conversations
hmm
because arrogant, self-absorbed people don't know when they're talking too much
mm
because they like hearing their own voice. So he's going to participate often, but because you have him guarded and untrusting, his utterances need to be small.
hmm
So he's going to talk often, but not say much.
mm
Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And then you're going to parallel him not saying much with his inner thought.
hmm
Um, there's a lot of characters that do this in literature, in recent literature, that are pulled off really well. Ove from A Man Called Ove is this way, really rich inner thought that is very negative and grumpy, but doesn't talks a lot, but doesn't say much when he does.
hmm
Eleanor Oliphant is the same way. She's very negative toward the world around her, very guarded and pessimistic, has a very rich inner thought where she's constantly criticizing everything, participates in conversations, but never more than a sentence when she speaks.
mm
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's kind of how you need to push this character. We need to get in his head, we need to see what's happening. And then when he speaks, so again, here, like Windtalker, suddenly rather feeling small, young, and green, against this man who's clearly the king of his own world.
hmm
He hated that. He bristled and straightened his back, trying to make himself larger as he sit down across from the man. I just got here to this city, and I'm trying to get myself oriented. Right. He said, staring the man directly in the eye to let the man know that he wasn't going to be intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like that's kind of a more arrogant, self-absorbed
Yeah.
energy. Um, how does that feel?
Yeah. Yeah, you're completely right.
And I think part of the problem is you as a naturally, my experience with you anyway, is that you're very kind and you're very positive and you're very optimistic. This character is like the opposite of what I imagine your voice to be.
Yeah.
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 Lean into it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I would imagine, at least for the first third of the book, every scene you write, you're gonna be like, oh, such an asshole. But that's the character you've put yourself with. So you did it tastefully.
Yeah.
Um, again, I start marking here your segments
Mm-hmm.
because these are places where the conversation has a natural breath. And
Mm-hmm.
I need a couple sentences to tell me how Windtalker's perceiving what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two things I want to do for the rest of the conversation. I want to shape how his language. Your boss is great, by the way. The big boss is fantastic. We don't need to change his language. It's just Windtalker. I
Mm-hmm.
want to shape his utterances, and then I want you, wherever I've marked the end of a segment where the conversation takes a natural kind of emotional beat, I want you to give me a reflection from him on what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's just look at his words. I'd like to know who I'm talking to. Oh, I'd like to know who I'm talking to most of all. Windtalker, that's a great line. You don't need to change that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because it's aggressive. It's like you haven't introduced yourself yet. I apologize. He's raising hand. Jamie Drake. Windtalker took the offer and shook and offer hand and shook it firmly. Windtalker. They released each other's hands as Jimmy got back into the sofa again. Now I need two sentences of sizing Jimmy up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? How does Windtalker feel? And often somebody who's self-absorbed and arrogant is thinking about whether or not they can take this guy. Right? I have a friend who's very self-absorbed and arrogant, and he tells me all the time that every man, when they walk into a room, is deciding whether or not they can beat every other man up. And I tell him, no, that's only you. That's only you. You're the only one who does that. But that's kind of how you want Windtalker here, is like trying
Yeah.
to decide whether or not he can take this guy. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Yeah.
I can introduce you to a few folks you got a place to stay. The oil drum. Now, when he says pleasure, I can introduce you to a few folks that got a place to stay. An untrusting character is immediately going to think, what's the angle? What's he
Mm-hmm.
want from me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is a good utterance, but we need that thought.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because he just says where he's staying. He doesn't say anything else about it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
he says they'll look for you. I'm skipping a little bit. They'll look for you out there. You want to earn some coin, though? What are your special skills? I craft. I can craft talisman. He touched a finger to the Egyptian eye pin in his neck. Jimmy Simple knowledge. That's a little country bumpkin. This is the voice that you want of his friends,
Mm-hmm.
right? That you want of his like tag-alongs. The
Mm-hmm.
like, I can do fun things, right? Like that's how you want, and you want him being like, oh God, why? So that's the kind of like grumpy. So you want him here hedging a little bit and being arrogant at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, I have lots of there's lots of things I can do. There's you know there's really I have many talents, probably, but what I'm most known for is my ability to craft talismans. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Because
Yeah.
now he's posturing. It's all less comical, but in the same way, it's that Ron Burgundy Anchorman voice with Will Ferrell,
Mm-hmm.
where he's like, I have many fine leather bound books and things in my apartment smell of oak, right? Like it's that kind of just power positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the end of another segment. and here you want him to kind of feel like he's looking down on this guy. Like
Hmm.
he thinks he's so special. He thinks but he's never seen anybody like me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are you from? Wilshire. Now here's where we get that's it. That's all he would say. Wiltshire.
Yeah.
Here's where we get too vulnerable. But I traded all of my memories of the place with a powerful construct. So I'm sort of starting here again. He's not going to tell anybody that he doesn't
Mm.
know things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah. He might think that to inform the reader that
Mm.
that happened, but he's not going to say it out loud. And then here, Jimmy's response is perfect. You did what now? Right? Like that's perfect because it's this like, wait, what did you just say to me? Like, what are you telling me? Are you telling
Yeah.
me you have no memories? Because, you know, I am a mob boss who is now going to take advantage of you, Kansas country bumpkin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Which
Although,
is,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, it's just it's the sort of thing Wind Talker would brag about because it was a in the context of the world.
Hmm.
Um, what he did, well, I mean, Jimmy's reaction is like, yeah,
Yeah.
um, it was a really big deal, and so he's sort of bragging.
Okay.
It's like,
Then I needed to sound more like a Brack.
yeah, okay.
I needed to sound like Wiltshire, but in order to do this and this and this, because, I was standing against an unstoppable force, I traded all of my memories, right?
Hmm.
And now I am blank, right? Like, so he needs to talk about who he is
Hmm.
in the exchange of this thing as if it's something he's proud of. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
yeah.
And I might not say Wiltshire in that case. I might say like it doesn't matter
Oh, yeah,
because blah 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 blah. Right? Like if you're going to
yeah.
emphasize the like bragging of what he did, make it about what he did. And
Hmm.
then give me an inner thought where he says that he's proud of himself.
Hmm.
Right? He couldn't help but feeling pride when he described the great
Hmm.
sacrifices he'd made to be this awesome. Don't say to be this awesome, but that's kind of the feeling you want to give him, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is what he thinks to himself.
Yeah. It is a very if you a lot of times listening to this voice, listen to a voice, especially when I'm writing a voice that's not mine. I need to find a voice that feels that way in the world
Mm.
and listen to it a lot. And then once I get it, I'm a very auditory person, so I don't know if this will work for you or not. But once I get it in my head and I've listened to it a lot, I I can flip into it.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When we're talking, I'm very much hearing Will Arnett. He does the
Mm.
like Lego Batman.
Hmm.
Um, he has a podcast called Smartless. You might just listen to him talk a little bit because
Yeah.
it'll give you the wind talker.
Hmm.
He's so cocky. And that Batman, but he's comical. You're not looking for comical. You're
Mm.
looking for dark and brooding. But that Lego Batman character very much has the like, you know, let's listen to my mixtape of me screaming. It's awesome. You're gonna love it. But that's kind of what you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Um, and again, Will Arnett he kind of plays that one note all the time, but he does that note. It works because you surround him with naive, joyful characters.
Mm.
When you surround him with naive, joyful characters, it kind of projects the absurdity of his self-absorption. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Even in the podcast, they surround him with I can't remember the actor's name. He was on the TV show Will and Grace.
Hmm.
And he's very Sean, oh crap, I can't remember, but he's very vibrant and trusting and naive and just happy to be here.
Hmm.
Will Arnett you can only listen to Will Arnett because Sean is there.
Yeah.
That's the only, if you take Sean away, it's just Will Arnett being an asshole for an hour and you can't, it would be untenable. So but I would try to catch this voice somehow because it's so different than yours. And
Mm.
that helps me. Once I get it paired with somebody who represents this kind of character in the real world, I
Mm.
can listen to it and get it locked in my brain.
Mm.
Yeah, here again, very trusting. Now that we've kind of, I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker now that we've kind of hit the, is
Hmm.
that okay? Or do you
Yeah,
want
yeah,
me to
it's
keep
fine.
hammering it down? Otherwise, I'm just going to keep saying the same thing to you over and over again. You're going to be like, Jeff, I get it. But very trusting. It's kind of a long story, but the result is that I don't remember my childhood at all. No family, nothing before I really changed. That's very vulnerable and very trusting. He's talking about what he doesn't have. You want him
Mm.
talking about what he gained.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I lost my memories, but I got this thing, right? Like, and that's what you want him saying.
Yeah.
That kind of, repositioning his own story to be about his awesomeness. Readers of your series will be like, oh, he sees that differently than we see it, which is going to be great, right? Like readers of the series are going to be like, oh, Windtalker is fascinating. I wasn't thinking of what happened in the same way that he's thinking of it. He seems to have a different take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which will be I think will really work well. It'll make the book fresh
Hmm.
for readers who've read the series.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I would, Jimmy nodded sagely, regaining his composure. Um, Here, Jimmy says, that's different. Was it worth it? It was, Windtalker said with a smile. That I actually, now that we're describing the character, I actually like this exchange.
Hmm.
This is a really, here you nailed a really great segment transition. You give me a nice reflection before we move into the next piece of the conversation. So I just wanted to note it, that
Hmm.
that's a really solid one. Um, so this is again me being picky, and this is about construction of the utterances on the page.
Hmm.
Right. Well, I can put you in touch with someone who sells supplies. She'd probably be up for selling your talisman too, come to think of it. She deals with a lot of packs, so she can probably sell them to folks who need them. Do you have a sample? Windtalker's answer to do you have a sample is take a look.
Hmm.
But you give me take a look 2 lines down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we want to get those utterances because this is Jimmy's utterance. It's just body language, but this is Jimmy's response to Windtalker. We want to
Hmm.
get those utterances as close to each other as possible so we
Hmm.
can get the energy of the characters playing hot potato with words.
Hmm.
So Jimmy says this, Windtalker rummaged his bag for something he could part with. He pulled out a 2-inch long piece of wood. He chipped. It was a dark knot in the middle of the surface. He got to his feet, placed the wood chip against the door into the bar, so the knot faced away from the door. Jimmy stood, a small smile playing on his full lips. Take a look. Well, he's already taking a look. So grab that, take a look, and put it up here. Take a
Hmm.
look. He beckoned. Jimmy stood, a small file playing on his lips. The man towered over him nearly a foot. Windtalker wasn't exactly a short man. He stood, pressed one eye to the wood. So here, you give me this detail that Jimmy towers over him. That's going to make us a self-absorbed, arrogant person pretty uncomfortable.
Hmm.
They rarely like to be to made to feel small.
Yeah.
If this were a comedy, I would probably have Windtalker like try to stand on a box or something. But it's not a comedy. It's a more dark fantasy. So you need to tell me that like, he tried to make himself look a little bit bigger.
Mm.
So not wanting to seem the small character. Um, so here, sure can you keep that one. The Kansas country bumpkin here who just hands him something that's like, yeah, I trust you. Hold on to it for me. Windtalker needs to have an inner thought about why he's doing this
Hmm.
because there's got to be more motivation there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's the summary of all my notes. I don't anything else you want to talk about with the piece?
Don't think so.
Okay, so we need a little bit different voice from him,
Hmm.
and you need to pepper everything with his inner thought.
Yeah.
We're missing a ton of inner thought, especially since you've used it in the other books. We have to get in Windtalker's head to
Hmm.
set a different tone than you have in your
Yeah.
other books. Yeah.
I think I've probably got better at that as the book has gone on
Likely.
because
Yeah.
yeah, because I'm just a discovery writer and I write linearly. This
Mhm.
was near the beginning and it has developed. So it's going back to the beginning and fleshing it out and putting
Re-editing.
yeah.
Yeah. The scene where he meets his pack is, or meets members of his pack, is going to be a really important one. I would recommend you balance him between I need these characters and I'm very annoyed by them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Really to ring in that self-absorption,
Hmm.
because then you can have a nice character arc where at the end he's less annoyed by them and more um entertained.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Like a big
Yeah.
brother. You want to move him from like an annoyed big brother to an entertained big brother.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anything else I can do to help with the piece or with the writing?
I think that is exactly what I was looking for. Like I
Okay.
said in my email to you, like, oh God, I'm not in his head. And
Yeah.
that's really, really helped.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, I'm excited for the book. I mean, Holly, your writing's beautiful. Your
Thank you.
descriptions are so spot on. Um, all right, I'm gonna hit stop and we can talk a little bit more.
Okay.